Minister Ann Lind, welcome to In Conversation.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here.
Minister, do you regret how Sweden dealt with the pandemic, its hands-off approach, given your very high death rates?
Well, actually, I think that the goals from the Swedish government has been the same as in any other country, and that is to save life and protect the public health. But we also wanted to flatten the curve to be able to take away the pressure from the national health system. But then we have used a little bit different when it comes to measures, especially in two areas. We have kept the child care and school facilities open, and we have not demanded people to stay in home in a full lockdown. But we have had a wide range of measures when it comes to keeping the social distancing, washing the hand, work from home, stay at home when you have the slightest symptoms, and avoid crowds.
But unfortunately, the elderly homes, the care facilities had unusually large levels of people dying from COVID-19.
Unfortunately, I have to give you right in that we did not manage to fully protect our vulnerable people in the elderly care homes. And we see that the average age of people in Sweden dying from COVID-19 is 82, and 90% of the mortality are for people 70 years or older. But at the same time, when it comes to elderly care home, we have legally binding measures already from the beginning. So there we did not have voluntary recommendation or so on. We had legally binding measures. In Sweden, we count the mortality rate. If you had COVID-19, then that is statistically the reason for death, even if the main reason was heart failure or something else.
Yes, that's a very interesting aspect you're mentioning, Minister, because you define it as being a COVID-19 death if the person had COVID-19 when they died. But it could be also that that person had had cancer for a long time already.
Well, actually, there has been now, for the last 30 days, some evaluation in some of our regions, and they found that of the death during the last 30 days, it was only 15% that only died because of COVID-19, and 85% had very serious illness when it comes to heart conditions or cancer or other things. And it often happens in Sweden that our statistics give a picture that might not be the same as in other picture.
So you're saying that perhaps in some time from now, we may discover that Sweden's death rate from COVID-19 is not actually as high as it looks now.
I think it's too early to make the evaluation now when there are so different ways of counting, when we don't know the mortality rate on it for a yearly basis. So I would wait with that. But then, of course, I don't try to hide it. We have had a high rate of death in our elderly care center. That is something that we feel is a failure.
In Sweden, you haven't made it compulsory, but it's beginning to look like masks are something that do help prevent the spread of COVID-19. Would you consider making the mask compulsory when people go out of their houses?
Well, I don't think that we will make it compulsory for everybody in every single situation. But according to the Public Health Agency, the use of masks could be recommended in certain circumstances, such as heavy local outbreak. One reason for being a little bit reluctant with the recommendation from our part is that the public might loosen their other measures, like social distancing and staying at home when they have the slightest symptom, because they would think that the masks is the solution. So we try to balance this as much as possible.
Is that actually an attitude that can work for other parts of the world? Is it something that we could actually apply to Asia?
I would say that it very much depends on what kind of culture, history, and organization of the society you have. In Sweden, for example, when it came to forbid visits to elderly care homes, that was a legally binding measure after the expert advice. But the authorities gives out recommendation to people. Health agency has given out a recommendation of social distancing, washing your hands, staying at home with the slightest symptoms, and so on. And what we can see is that people are following this to a very high degree. We actually measure it. It's more than 80% that is following the recommendation and is following in over time. For several months now, we have not had anything like demonstration or protests in the Easter break. It was said, stay at home, don't go to your normal tourist destination where you usually go when it's Easter break. More than 90% stayed at home. That's because we are used of this kind of recommendation from the authorities. It's not kind of a tip that you could follow if you feel about it or not. It's sometimes that it's because of for the best of the country. There is no political motives or corruption that is the reason why the authorities are giving this kind of advice. And I think that's why it's sustainable and people are following it for a long time. And every country must choose what's working for them.
Some would say that, in fact, all of this only works in Sweden because you have already a very distant, low-density country. In Stockholm, for example, the number of people per square kilometer is almost half that of, let's say, in Singapore. So people are already not living very close to each other. And you also have many single-person households.
Actually, I don't know. I just don't want to say that what the Swedish way of doing what we think is the best would work in other countries. But we want it from the beginning, and that was very clear when we discussed it in the government, that this is not going to be over in a month. We need to have sustainable tools that people will have the stamina to follow.
Are you worried that open, rich economies like Sweden are going to face a very different world in which you're going to have to look to your own domestic economy, that you won't have open borders anymore? Trade is really going to take a hit?
Yes, I am. Sweden is an export-oriented country. About half of our GDP is dependent on export, and every third job is because of the export. And we have seen during the pandemic a lot of closed border, export restrictions, and also the global value chains has been broken. And for any country that is export oriented, as Sweden is, this has meant, of course, economic consequences. I also think it's an issue of solidarity. Countries has put export restriction on medical equipment, on protective wear, so that they wanted to keep it for themselves and not export it to where it's needed. One example is that Sweden is one of the world's largest ventilator producer. Some countries, they even did not allow our ventilators to go to the final destination because of export restriction. And that is, of course, a very, very bad consequence. I think also that the companies would be very much in their evaluation of what has happened, look to where they have the production. Now, you sit in Sweden with a company, but you could have the production anywhere in the world. But when it has been shown to be so vulnerable for a pandemic like this, maybe you would think, should I bring home the production closer to Sweden? This is something I think will be a consequence of this pandemic.
Do you think, though, that the US-China trade war is going to, together with the pandemic, is going to make countries have to align to one or the other bloc that you trade with more?
I don't think it will go that far, that you have to take sides and so on. But I am very worried for the growing tension between United States and China. I think it's very unfortunate that especially United States is withdrawing from multilateral organizations like the World Health Organization, the Paris Agreement, parts of the WTO, and so on, because we need a strong, engaged, and constructive United States in the international cooperation. That is what we wish for. And of course, we also wish for China to be the same active. And we have some criticism when it comes to trade issues with China, but we think that the reason or the solution is to solve it together inside international organization and not to withdraw from international organization or to put different kinds of hindrance to solve it.
Do you think that the suspicion of China and China's intentions are warranted to the level that the US is saying? I mean, take, for example, a very well-known Swedish brand, Volvo. Volvo now has a majority shareholder that is Chinese. Geely bought that 10 years ago. Has that been a problem for Sweden? Is that considered a security issue?
Well, you have to see it in different ways. When it comes to Volvo and Geely, nobody can say anything else than that has been a very, very successful cooperation. And that Volvo has been able to keep everything what is Swedish, everything from the cooperation between the trade union, which is very strong at Volvo, and the leadership, and the development of the new cars and the working environment and everything like that has worked very, very well. At the same time, Sweden, as all the other EU countries, has been aware of the risks when it comes to security and those issues. It's not directed specifically against China. It's against any possible security risks.
Well, then I would ask about something like 5G. I mean, people tend to focus on Huawei and what's happening with Huawei and the measures that the US is taking against Huawei, but nobody seems to bring up Ericsson. Nobody asks whether Ericsson may be collecting data unfairly or secretly, or perhaps even passing it to the Swedish intelligence. Is Ericsson giving information to the Swedish government that it shouldn't?
No, it's not. And maybe it has something to do that Sweden is a free, fair, and democratic country, and China is unfortunately not.
So you think that basically that it depends on the checks and balances in the country?
Yes, and also we know that we have a law, for example, in China that gives the right for the authorities to ask any company to pass on information to the authorities. And we don't have that kind of law in Sweden or any other EU country. And I think that has been one of the reasons why there has been discussions about this. But I would say that we don't have any law or something like that. We have a law that says that there need to be a security check for all security sensitive projects. And that means that we now have the security authorities checking investments like this.
What about the Green Lobby, also which is very strong in Sweden, Greta Thunberg and others around her, who argue that COVID-19 is telling us not to fly anymore. It's telling us to stay at home and stop flying. Do you agree with that?
I am very proud of Greta Thunberg. I think what she has accomplished is absolutely fabulous. But I don't agree with the non-flying proposal. I think not the least for a country like Sweden, who is up in the north, at the same time are very dependent and want to be very much involved in international arrangements and cooperation. At the same time, I think this is an opportunity that now when we get a lot of packages for rebooting the economy, we should do that in an environmental friendly way, a sustainable way, thinking of the climate. And when the EU took this huge package to restart the economy, this was one of the main issues that yes, you will get money to reboot, to restart, to try to lift the economy, but you will not get it if you don't have your climate conscience in what you're doing.
Now, that's exactly it, Minister, the climate conscience. Is there going to be any money left for climate change and environmental issues? Because we're channeling so much money into these stimulus packages, not just in Sweden, not just in Europe, but all over the world.
It's not two separate things that is in competition with each other. Instead, if we do it in a smart way, as United Nations had this slogan, build back better, I think it could be an opportunity because many countries and organizations are putting huge amount of money into new infrastructure projects, for example, and renewing old housing areas, everything like this. And if you have a demand on making that in a climate-friendly way, in a sustainable way, it's a win-win.
Minister, here in Asia, we've often looked up to Sweden for many things: climate change, environment, childcare, all of these things. Are you still a country that we Asians ought to look up to look for good ideas from?
Well, I think that you can always find good ideas in nearly all countries in different sectors. You mentioned some things that we are very proud of, and that is our childcare, for example. We have by law the right to childcare from 1 year of age, and also very affordable childcare for everybody. When it comes to climate and environment, there's where Sweden is doing some of our biggest investments. We care a lot for climate and so on. It's not an accident that Greta Thunberg comes from Sweden. But I think that no country is perfect. We can learn from Singapore. Hopefully you can learn something from us. And that is why we need the international cooperation so much. And that is what I hope most from this, when this pandemic is over, is that we can go back to cooperation between countries. We can go back to learning from each other, trading with each other, have good cooperation from Singapore to Sweden, from all over. And I miss that. I miss that a lot.
Minister, thank you very much for being on In Conversation.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be invited.